Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 340. I'm recording this on March 13th, 2025, and this episode will go live on March 17th, 2025. So welcome to the show. So number one, you might be watching me on the YouTube version of the podcast, or you might be listening on audio, maybe walking your dog or doing the laundry or just working out or something. So wherever you are listening, welcome. And thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's episode. Let's start out. I want to tell you exactly what you're going to learn in today's episode. And you probably saw the title of the show, the episode. And so it's going to be about how to provide clear and effective assists to your students, sort of a tongue twister. So this whole idea of assisting doesn't get talked about too much, but it's really an interesting conversation to have. And so on today's show, you're going to learn some assisting techniques that you can begin to experiment with in your classes right away. I always like to share something on these solo episodes that you can take away and start to use right away. So the time that you invest in listening to the entire episode will give you something tangible that you can use in the 3D, right? In actually teaching your classes. Now, truth be told, I have some notes in front of me. So if you're watching, you're going to see me looking down a couple times. Just wanted to let you know that's what I'm looking at. Can't keep all this stuff in my head. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention before we get into this topic of assisting is that today, March 13th, 2025, is a pretty interesting date or a pretty monumental date for me. And it might even be for you, and maybe you didn't realize it. If not this particular date, probably someday this week. Because for me, March 13th, 2020 was the last class I taught in person here in Boston before the pandemic shut down all the yoga studios. Matter of fact, shut down just about every business in the city. It took us a couple of days. I think the NBA canceled their season 2 or 3 days before the 13th, but by Friday the 13th, 2020, that was the last class that I taught. And interestingly enough, it wasn't until 2024, with the exception of a couple of special events, that I went back to teaching regular in-person classes. All those years in between, those 4 years in between, I 100% supported teachers in my program, which is virtual. And so definitely right after the shutdown, or right in the beginning of the pandemic shutdown, I had a lot more teachers enrolling in the program because online training was where it was at. And that just built momentum. And now I have a regular stream of teachers who enroll in my programs all the time. But last year in 2024, I decided, I want to get back to teaching at least a couple times a week. So that's what I do on the side, or that's in addition to supporting teachers in the program and all the free content and the podcast here. That's now what my life looks like. But I'd love to know, how has your teaching changed since 2020? And you can send me a DM on Instagram. I'd love to hear. I know for me, one of the things that really changed is just noticing how many students continue to take classes online. Either they have a studio that they used to attend in person and they switched to online during the shutdown, and they just kept doing that. And now that's just the way they practice. Maybe students who take classes on YouTube. Certainly the whole online teaching domain increased exponentially. And so many students continue to take classes online, even though the studios are back up and running. Maybe like me, the studios you used to teach in no longer exist. Matter of fact, both studios that I taught for over 10 years apiece, both of those studios shut down in the few months right after the shutdown, and they never returned. And that was heartbreaking for me. I mean, the loss of community the loss of connection, the loss for me of what at that point was 60% of the revenue I was bringing in for my business was coming from in-person classes and workshops and trainings, and that just immediately went away. Luckily, I had the online program and I was able to really ramp that up. But for a lot of yoga teachers, maybe you never made that up. Maybe that continues to be a hole in your business. And the other component that I hear all the time is teachers who went to training before the pandemic. They started teaching before the pandemic. They obviously stopped teaching, like all of us did, in the initial phases of the pandemic, and they never went back to teaching. And so maybe that's you. Maybe you're listening to this podcast wishing you could get back to teaching and you haven't, and you feel like it's been too long and you don't remember what to do and you feel too nervous and you don't feel expert enough because you've had this hiatus. I hear that all the time. And if that's you, send me a DM on Instagram because I definitely can help you get back to it. So I just wanted to mark today's date, at least for me, and I'd love to hear from you what your experiences have been since the shutdown and then the reopen, and how does teaching look different for you now that we have that in our memory of obviously not a very good time. So that sort of does dovetail with our topic today, which is we're going to be talking about assisting. And we're going to be focusing on what are clear and effective techniques we can use when we're assisting our students. Now, the reason I say it dovetails with what I've just been talking about is not because assisting has a relationship to the pandemic, but assisting has changed a lot, just like teaching has changed a lot since COVID, because of something else. And in my opinion, assisting has changed a lot because of two main things. Number one, the Me Too movement, and number two, the revelation of teachers who have exploited their power as a teacher to abuse and harass their students, primarily male teachers with female students. And there have been several exposés in the past 5 to 6 years that have exposed teachers who have been abusing their position to harass and abuse and sexually abuse teachers. Now, I don't have all the details. I'm not here to call anybody out specifically, but I've read articles. I'm sure you know the kinds of articles we're talking about and the teachers who have been, I'm not sure you know, but this definitely was something that in the past 5, 6 years became more public, came out more in the public domain. Now, even aside from that, not to put it aside, but even in addition to that, this idea of the Me Too movement, which I know you know about, really shifted our perception of, at least in the context of assisting, the idea of people having agency over their own bodies. And not that as yoga teachers, we didn't already respect that and acknowledge that. It's just that it seems to have elevated it to a level of consciousness that we really didn't have before Me Too. Now, of course, the Me Too movement was about abusing power, somebody in a position of power abusing their power to sexually abuse somebody else. This is not exactly what we're talking about here. But embedded in that conversation, embedded in that movement, is the implied or overt characteristic of women or people have agency over their own body, and nobody has the right to touch them without their permission, without their explicit, informed permission, verbal permission. And so this is the kind of thing that dovetails with the conversation we're going to have today about assisting. This idea of greater awareness around having consent to assist. And the reason that this is different, and I can speak to this because I've been teaching for a long time. I've been teaching for over 20 years. And I can tell you that when I was trained for the first many years, I mean, my initial training, my secondary training, and subsequent years after that, that I attended workshops and received additional training, this topic did not come up. Nobody was really saying you need to have your students' permission in order to give them an assist and oppose. In fact, I can think back to my initial experiences as a Baptiste trained teacher, and it was just implied that when you came to a Baptiste class, you would get an assist. In fact, we had a culture of every teacher at primetime classes had an assistant, which was either an assistant or a teacher acting as an assistant in that person's class. And so when you were a student, there was another person, just like a typewriter, going from student to student to student. And we were not instructed to ask, would you like an assist? Is it okay if I touch you? We just did it in a lot of poses, including poses like Happy Baby, which clearly is not a pose where we should be moving into somebody's personal space. So that is just, and I'm not saying that was bad or wrong. None of our intentions as teachers were to abuse or to use our position as a teacher to touch somebody inappropriately. That's not what I'm saying. It's just that even if that's not your intention, there are some things that clearly just don't work anymore. And we want to grow and learn and evolve with new information. And so in today's world of teaching yoga, we are now informed so much more about the concept of having agency over your experience, the concept of consent, the act of consent, right? The explicit nature of consent. And that informs how we teach yoga. And that's a good thing. We want to have yoga. It's not an isolated, stagnant experience. It's a dynamic entity, even though it harkens back thousands of years ago. So, question for you, how do you feel about assisting? How do you feel about entering the personal space of another human being doing a yoga pose? What does that bring up in you? Because believe me, it's most likely going to bring something up. And that's part of your job, is to bring those things up and to ask yourself, what is it bringing up? How do I feel doing this? Because all of those feelings will come forth when you approach somebody to assist them. And so it's up to you to deal with those things and resolve them if they are barriers to you being an agnostic, clear, impartial, professional yoga teacher when it comes to touching another human being. So this is just a conversation we're having. What's coming up for you as you hear those two questions? How do you feel about assisting? And what comes up for you as you think about moving closer to another human being in a pose and touching them? And we're going to talk about the different types of assists. Now I'm just saying touching them without clarifying the different types of assists, the different types of touch. So let's just stay at a high level here. What comes up for you? Now, of course, you can't answer me in real life because you're just listening to this or watching it on YouTube. You can, though, send me a DM. So I would love you to DM me on Instagram and tell me what came up for you when you heard those two questions. So I also want to share a story before we get into the hows, the techniques, because this is such a unique story, and I think it brings up a lot of different aspects of assisting. When I was a newer teacher, again, I taught at the Baptiste Studios, and that was my dream. When I went to teacher training, I went after going to class at the Baptiste Studios in Boston for a couple of years, and I had a massive revelation that being a yoga teacher was my dharma. And so I literally shifted my life over a period of 18 months. I quit my corporate job, my six-figure salary. I started working as a personal chef to make a little extra money. And I completed my teacher trainings, volunteered at the studios a lot, and eventually, after about 6 months or so, got hired. I worked behind the scenes for Baron, and I also taught classes. And it was in one of these classes at the Cambridge studio that when I went in to teach the class, this man approached me and said, "I'd like you to assist me in wheel." And at the time, as I described, it was very common for people to have an assistant in class doing assists, and for all the teachers to assist students. So students were used to being assisted. And there was a very specific way that we were taught to assist people in wheel. It was a very interesting way. It was a very different way. I don't think I've ever seen it in any other studio, where you would stand at the head of the person as they laid on the ground, and they would reach their hands back, grab onto your ankles, and then as they pressed up into wheel, you would put their hands on their scapula and you would guide them into the back bend. And you needed to do this in a very specific way from an ergonomic and kind of postural point of view, because if you weren't grounded, you would drop that student. And if you weren't grounded, you would pull out your back. So the physical posture you needed to be in needed to be on point. Otherwise, you would really hurt yourself and they would really hurt themselves. And so this was not a random assist. And when we talk about the types of assists, you'll hear more about the different types. And so when this student approached me, not only did I take issue with the fact that this student was basically, and his tone of voice was basically demanding that I be at his beck and call and assist him in this pose, but I knew in my head as I observed him that it was going to be outside of my range of safety to assist a really large person in this pose. And even outside of that, it was just the demanding nature that I knew in my head, I don't want to be anywhere near this person. And so what I said in the moment was, I'll see what I can do. And I taught the class and I did not assist this person. And after the class, everyone was filing out and this person stayed back. And this person placed himself between me and the door to get out of the room and basically confronted me. How come you didn't assist me in this pose? And I knew in that moment I needed to de-escalate the situation. So over his shoulder, I saw the person in the lobby who was helping me with check-in. And I turned my back so that now I was by the door to get out into the lobby, and he was on the inside of the studio looking out. And I engaged him in conversation. I said, let's come out here and chat about it. And now we were out in the lobby and the other person was there as a witness. And we had a little bit of back and forth, and I just simply shared that I wasn't able to get to him. And I don't remember all the details of what we discussed, but eventually he left. So this particular example brings up a lot of different issues around assisting. It brings up you as a teacher honoring your personal space. It brings up the physical toll of assisting students if they are a specific kind of assist, and that we need to be cognizant of what is the physical toll on our bodies as we assist our students in particular ways. It also gets to this idea of agency, and that not only should the student have agency over their experience, but the teacher should as well. And so even though this is very rare, this concept of a student expecting an assist is completely inappropriate, and no one should be expecting anything from you that you are not willing to give. Matter of fact, I just took a class the other day, and the teacher asked towards the end of class, if you'd like an assist during Shavasana, raise your hand. And I raised my hand, and at that point, everybody was laying down, and she did not give me an assist. But I knew as we were coming up from Shavasana that because the class was so big, she probably saw me raise my hand, but she just didn't have enough time. And I didn't care, of course. But if I was the person I'm describing or another kind of person, I might be indignant. Hey, I raised my hand. How come you didn't assist me? Right? And certainly in today's world of catching people in mistakes and putting them on YouTube and putting them on Instagram and TikTok and saying, isn't this an awful person? That could be the kind of thing that went viral, right? I asked for an assist and I didn't get it. And now I feel rejected, or and this just starts to bring up, there is a very important aspect of personhood, of agency that we must keep in mind when we go into someone's physical space. I mean, I can certainly share in an earlier class when this teacher did assist me in Shavasana, I actually felt my eyes well up. And it just reminded me of how impactful it can be, especially in today's world, especially where everybody is so combative and so, I don't want to say everybody is so angry, but so much of the world we're living in now is set up in this environment where we need to look for the good things because there's so many things out there that are in the forefront of what we see that are triggering. And touch lives in this world of love and connection and mindfulness and meditation and yoga practice and sort of the softer side of life. And we rarely touch other people except for people that we know and love. And again, why? Because it's clearly not an appropriate thing to do unless we have a purpose to do it. And so when we allow ourselves to be touched, it can oftentimes bring up emotion because it's such a unique, it's such an uncommon experience. I mean, sometimes we even live with a partner and we might say to ourselves, wow, I don't even think I've given that person a hug in days or even longer. And when we think about babies that are born premature, what do they most need to thrive, to grow? They need touch. And so what do they do in the NICU? They take the baby and they put it on the bare skin of the mother and the father as a way to build connection, which literally helps the baby grow and thrive, especially if it's born premature. So I wanted to just share this with you as an example, and it just brings up a lot of the different topics that we'll talk about today. So let's get into some of the content here. So general principles of assisting. When we are assisting our students, it's really helpful to approach the student with the goal in mind of what are we going to do. And this is a little tricky because that means that you as a teacher need to know before you approach the student, what am I going to do? Because we don't want to be hovering around them thinking in that moment, what am I going to do? Because that is really awkward for the student. Think about when you're in downward facing dog and you see these feet around you and you're sort of tensing up thinking, this person's going to touch me. What are they going to do? So it's really important to have an idea of what is the point of your assist before you assist your student. Now, there are 4 approaches, and you might want to write this down. There are 4 approaches that we can take when we're assisting our student. We can look at it as what's the primary action of the pose, and we can reinforce that. We can look at what is the setup of the foundation, and maybe we make an adjustment to that. We can look at what 3 instructional assists can be provided to reinforce the point of the pose, the alignment of the pose. And then, and this last one is more by the wayside these days for all the reasons I described, we can ask ourselves what deepening assist, if any, might be possible. So as you approach the student, you can quickly assess which of these actions from you can be helpful. And this can give you some direction as to what assist you're going to provide. So there's a couple of general principles around just the physical aspect of assisting. So let's just take a look at those first. So the first one is your goal is direction, not perfection. Your goal is direction, not perfection. You're not looking at the person as you approach them thinking, oh, there's all these things I need to fix in this person. You want to look at that person and say, how can I move them in the direction of greater alignment in that pose? And when you shift in your mind the goal from the one to the other, that will completely inform the energy you use when you touch the person. If you're touching the person with the idea of, oh, I need to correct this person's body, that's a completely abrupt, rough assist. But if you're looking at that person as complete and beautiful and thinking, how can I guide this person into better alignment? That's not rough or abrupt. That's smooth and steady and supportive and shared in the context of helping the person learn and maybe experiencing something different. The next physical concept is make it meaningful or don't do it. And what this refers to is knowing what you're going to do, doing it, or don't do it. If you're standing there in front of the person or to the side of the person or whatever vantage point you have of them, you feel inspired to provide an assist, but you're not exactly sure if it's the right one, that will fall flat. So it's really important that you know what your intention is before you touch them and you do it and you move on. This is not the sort of thing where you want to be lingering in their physical space. That brings us to the next one. Know your intent before you approach. So this is back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, this idea of when you're walking up to the student, knowing exactly what you're going to do. This is only going to be in those few seconds you have as you approach them, but it will give you a chance to look, assess, decide, and then provide the assist. It's a very clean step-by-step process with no lingering, no questioning, and then you move on. Start at the foundation and work your way up. This is just based on functional movement. If I'm looking at a student at Warrior One and their hips seem a little uneven, I want to look down at their base. I want to look down at their feet, because if I adjust their feet, that will affect the position of their hips. If I just go in and adjust their hips and their feet are out of alignment, they might fall. So think of it like you're building a house. You're starting at the foundation and working your way up. Be in your foundation before you assist the student. Be in your foundation before you assist the student. I talked about this a little bit when I was relating that story to you. You need to be steady before you can assist your student. Otherwise, you're not going to be in a stable position to assist them. If you've ever gone to physical therapy and worked with a physical therapist, this is a big part. And I went to physical therapy school at Boston University. That's what I thought I wanted to be, so I can speak on this. You know, part of what you learn is good body mechanics. This is what nurses know. This is what nurses' aides know. Anybody that works in a nursing home, certainly somebody that works in a hospital, a patient transport person. You're dealing with all different kinds of bodies. And if you don't have good body mechanics, in about 3 months, you're going to be in bed with a lot of physical manifestations of problems that come from poor body mechanics. So massage therapists know this, EMTs know this, anybody that's in direct patient care, which I also did in my life at one point, really important to know what to do. So you need to be in your foundation before you put your hands on somebody so that you're safe, not only from your own physical health, but that you can assist them without fear of falling over or knocking them down. Next one, know the intent behind your assist, whether it's instructional, deepening, or directive. So we have a few options when we assist our students. We can provide instruction with our hands and reinforce what we said. Some students, might learn through that touch or have that partnered effect of hearing the auditory cue and then the hands-on assist. We can have our students maybe move a little bit deeper in the pose by assisting them. And this assist is one to be used with the greatest caution. And I would even say in today's world, this hardly ever happens anymore. And there's really, in my view, not a reason to do any kind of deepening assist. We can also be directive in our assist, which means that we're using a very specific touch to communicate one action, like dropping the hip or moving the knee in a particular way. So know the intent behind your assist. The next idea is your goal, and this sounds kind of obvious, but let's just put it out there. Your goal is to help, not to hurt. Not that you would ever want to hurt your students, but it bears repeating because some students can become sort of dependent on doing a pose a certain way and getting an assist as a way to get there. Now, this really doesn't happen as much, I don't think, anymore, but obviously my experience is my own. You can tell me what your experience is. I can definitely say 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it was common to go to a class and in a forward fold, get a really deep assist, or in a seated forward fold, get a really deep assist, or in a child's pose, get a really deep assist, or frog or happy baby, and just becoming really part of the pose for the student, rather than the student being in the pose and we're just facilitating something briefly. And I really, really believe that that's really more the role of the teacher in today's world. Another idea to keep in mind is the idea of being creative. When you assist a student, be creative in your approach. This might mean using blocks or other props in a particular way. It could be giving them like a really specific short instruction as you're giving them the prop. I can remember a couple of times I kind of squeezed in between the person and the next person, and I just did a quick demo, and that was really what the student needed. The other thing, and this brings up exactly what we're talking about here, the idea of having props at the ready. When you're teaching your class, have some extra props around so it's really easy to grab them if you need to when you are assisting your students. This is a little bit more of a fine-tuned one, but you can use your breath as well as you're assisting your students, especially if the student is in a twist. This is, again, a little bit more of a close-up assist type. This would be potentially a little bit directive and instructional, but could be deepening when you have somebody in a twist and your hands are on their rib cage, and as they're exhaling, you're moving them into the twist. This is the idea of using the breath as the engine to facilitate the spinal rotation. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're assisting your students, show them as much as you can versus talking to them. And this sort of tracks with the style of class that you teach. There are some classes where the teacher is talking in a conversational way, and that would yield a little bit more leeway when it comes to talking more in assists. In many yoga classes, though, it's more of just the teacher is talking, the students are silent. It's more of just a directive, do this, do that, do this, do that. And so in keeping with that more mindful sort of quiet approach, it's really helpful when you assist somebody to just be minimal in your words. So once you get their permission to just simply, maybe with no words, just take your finger and gently move the knee in a particular direction, or take your hand and just gently shift the hip and then move on. So there's not a lot of talking, which would take them out of their practice. And now all of a sudden they're having a conversation with you. Now, let's just say a couple of things about you as a teacher. Let's start at the top. If you're teaching a sequence that's brand new or one you don't know very well, don't assist your students. This is a whole other topic that I talk about a lot, because so many teachers tell me when they go in to teach their classes, their head is so full with thinking about the sequence that they just can't think about anything else. And what usually goes with that is having to practice it as the only chance you have to remembering it. So that kind of teacher is not assisting because they're just not walking around. They're on the mat. If you want to be the kind of teacher who does the walk and talk, who can assist your students, who has the sense of presence to be able to do that, you have to know your sequence. Your brain can't be thinking so hard about the sequence. When you go into your class, you only have a certain amount of brain power. Let's say it's 90%, right? We're never really running at 100% because we could be tired, we could be hungry, we could be distracted, whatever it is. So let's say you go into your class, you have 90% of your brain power available, but you're teaching a sequence that you just created the week before. 70 to 80% of your brain power, and these are not finite terms, but you get the gist. 70% of your brain power is going to be devoted to trying to remember that sequence. So this is not the time to say, oh, let me also assist my students. This is though one of the beauties of creating and using a signature sequence. And if you haven't seen my training video on signature sequencing, send me a DM on Instagram, use the term signature sequence, and I'll send you the training video. And it will blow your mind because now you're teaching a sequence that you know, that you love, that you get known for. It's your signature. And sure, every couple of months you might change it, but it's your primary way of teaching. And you get to know it so well that now when you go in to teach your class with 90% brain power, only 10% has to go to the sequence because you know it really well. You don't even hardly need to think about what comes next. It's just flowing from you. So now, first thing on the list here is to be present. You are present now. So when you're present, you can assist people clearly and effectively. When you assist your students, your head has to be in the game. It can't be thinking of something else. This means even if things are crazy in your life, even if you're hungry or tired, whatever it is, if you're going to go into someone's personal space, you've got to be present. Otherwise, it just is not going to be received well. It's not going to be delivered clearly and agnostically and effectively. Next thing, stay neutral despite feedback to the contrary. I'll never forget one time somebody was in Twisting Triangle. They were struggling. They were like a second from falling over, and they were trying to put their hand on the outside of the front leg. And I went over and I put a block on the inside and I said, here. And they pushed that block away. They didn't want that block. And in that moment, if I got all indignant and if I felt insulted, that would have been a whole situation. But I didn't because I'm agnostic. It makes no difference to me. Take the block, don't take the block. You have agency over your experience in my class. I'm simply here to give you some suggestions. So experiment with that. Students have agency and you are just there as a guide. And so just stay neutral. Just stay neutral. This next one goes without saying, but wash your hands. Wash your hands before, wash your hands after. If you're done teaching your class and you didn't wash your hands, by all means, don't touch your face. Don't put your hands and fingers in any part of your body, ears, eyes, nose, mouth. Wash your hands. And take care of yourself. Hydrate. Get your rest. Make sure you're going into class and you're in good shape to be able to be a facilitator. Things like arriving early to set up the room, that can be really helpful. Establishing a pattern in the room, if assisting is something you're going to do, establishing a pattern so you're getting to everybody evenly. Wear the right clothing, so as you're leaning over students, you're not falling out of your top, you're not going to trip over your wide-legged yoga pants, things to just like that. No strings or tassels or stuff like that. And also, this is a little bit off key, but it bears repeating. Get your CPR and first aid certification. I do this every year. I honestly think studios should require it. It is so important to have, and you never know when you're going to need to use it. And you may be the only person in the room that is first aid certified and CPR certified. And you really, as a teacher, part of your responsibility is to care for your students. And that is one way that you can do that. A couple of different things from the student perspective. So number one, know when to back off. If you notice as you're assisting your student, any sort of flinching or kind of movement of the body, just back off. That is a nonverbal cue that you probably have gone too far or it's not welcome. And of course, we haven't explicitly spoken yet on the topic of permission, but everything we're talking about here goes with that idea that before you're doing any of the things we're talking about, you have received permission from the student to assist them. As if you're doing any kind of deepening assist, let's say you're doing some sort of Sunday night workshop and the explicit purpose of the workshop is a relax and renew, including assists. Let's say the workshop invitation even has on the invitation that there will be 5 or 6 teachers just devoted to assisting in this workshop, in addition to the teacher teaching the class. So now students are coming into this special workshop knowing that they're going to be assisted. So now we have explicit permission given prior to their arrival. Everybody there, obviously we're still going to get it, but it's baked into what is being offered. In the context of that, if you're doing any kind of assist that's a little bit deeper than usual, just watch the student for their reaction. Look for breathing patterns. Feel the quality of your hands on their body. Feel the muscles and the fascia's reaction, right? The joint reaction. This is all part of using your hands as tools, both on the physical level and on the spiritual, energetic level. Working with beginners is interesting when it comes to assisting. Much of what you do with beginners is going to help you as you work even with more experienced people. So, learning how to talk them through it with essential action cues is one part of it. You can also use directive assists as a way to really enhance their learning of how to do the poses. Outside of that, the other things I've got here are really about the studio environment. So things like make sure the room is clean, make sure the props are available, make sure students have good space between them. I'll speak to that only from the point of view of when you see people walk into class late, you show them where to go. There's nothing worse for a student than showing up late and just plopping themselves by the door or plopping themselves next to the first person they see, disturbing that person. So you need to be aware of when that person shows up late and they're standing there at the door with all their stuff, you need to welcome them in and you need to show them where to go. So have your eyes on the room right as you start the class to make a mental note of where can I put an additional person if somebody else shows up. Have extra towels available. And, this last thing here is stay neutral, but remember for students, touch can bring up emotion. I don't know when that teacher assisted me the other day, if she noticed my eyes fill up and the tears coming from my face. It's probably pretty obvious I was laying on my back. I didn't have a towel over my eyes. So notice, this is part of the holding space idea, right? We are holding space for our students to feel what they feel. And given everything I talked about earlier about touch in today's world, it can bring stuff up. We don't have time, but I don't necessarily subscribe to the belief that we hold emotions in our bodies. When we look at it anatomically, what do we hold in our bodies? We hold tension, right? Tension is related to things on the emotional level, stress, loss, grief. So it's not that we're releasing the emotion, we're releasing the tension caused by the emotion. So, whenever somebody says, oh, let the emotions out of your hips, that to me is a mismatch. Let the tension out of your hips. Do you feel tension in your hips? Do you feel your hips relaxing? And then as a result of that, that may cause a release of emotion. So maybe this is a little bit esoteric, but again, and it's not about right, wrong. This is just a perception. This is just an approach. And then the last thing I'll say is you need to take care of you. adding assisting to your classes is a whole other level of teaching. And it is an energetic exchange. And depending on your physical and emotional and spiritual constitution, you may be deeply affected by assisting students in a negative way. You may feel energetically depleted. You may feel a spiritual cord attachment where if they don't react in a way you want, you may feel badly about yourself. These are all negative things. One of the, I don't want to say elevated ways, but one of the most facilitative ways to assist is completely agnostically. Agnostically, I don't even know the definition of agnostic, like neutral. Just neutral. You are just moving around the room. You are just assisting people. You are not reacting. Nothing is good or bad or wrong. I mean, I guess in a certain context, there's right, wrong. I mean, we're obviously talking about some of these things in that way, but you're not doing things to get a reaction, right? It's sort of like you're just a neutral entity. So that is a really important part of assisting to keep in mind. That's something that we can hold out as an idea of how we wish to be. You know, it's sort of like at the end of class when students say, oh, that's such a good class, or oh, that was such a good class, I loved it. Okay, great. I'm glad you loved it. Or what if somebody left and said, oh, I really didn't like that class. That was way too hard and you didn't do blah, blah, blah pose. Okay, great, right? Neither is good or bad. I'm not reacting to either, right? I'm not reacting to either. This is just, okay, fine. So this just gives you a little bit of the landscape of assisting. There's another level of this conversation. I'm actually doing a workshop tomorrow, March 14th, on this topic. And if you'd like the replay of that workshop, send me a DM on Instagram and let me know that you'd like the replay of the assisting workshop, and I'll send it to you. And, you know, the last thing I'll say on this is that at some point over the next couple of weeks, I'm most likely going to do a part 2 where I have an assistant in the video with me, and I'll do a live workshop where I actually demonstrate assists. And that'll take this conversation to the next level beyond the conversational presentation that we've done here into the experiential one where I actually demonstrate some of these assists on another human being. All right. So with that, I told you about the replay of the workshop that I'm doing tomorrow on this topic, so you can get that if you'd like. I'd also love, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you can leave a comment. And I want to give a shout out to Bernadette, who watched one of my recent episodes here on YouTube, and she sent me an email and she commented that she watched it on YouTube. And I'm always curious if anybody is watching this on YouTube instead of listening to it. And so I'd love to know if you are. So because if you're watching this on YouTube, you're either at your laptop or you're most likely at your laptop, it's easy for you to leave a comment. Harder to do that on your phone. So please leave me a comment if you're watching this on YouTube. I'd love to know. And then the last thing I'll say is one of the things I developed over the past 3 months is I started a group program called the Yoga Teacher Confidence Club. And this is probably the fastest and easiest way for you to build your cueing and sequencing skills. Every week I do a workshop about a different topic on cueing, sequencing, mindset, and a little bit of anatomy. And so this month-to-month membership is a fantastic way for you to be part of a community, to build your skills, to have a place to go, to be supported. At this point, we've already done a number of workshops. You can curate your own experience by signing up for the Yoga Teacher Confidence Club and then looking at the replays and picking the topics that are most interesting to you. I promise that every workshop you watch or attend live, you are going to walk away with something you can experiment in your classes with to help you feel more confident and impactful as a teacher. And I made it really inexpensive. It's just $29 a month. So if this sounds like a good next step for you, you can go to my Instagram and write off the link in my bio you can sign up for the Yoga Teacher Confidence Club. You can also do it right off my website, which is barebonesyoga.com. And as soon as you log into the website, you're going to see group program. Now, if anatomy is really your thing and you know in your heart that learning anatomy would help you be a better teacher, my one-to-one program is definitely for you. That's where I'll walk you through the step-by-step to learn anatomy. And in I don't know, maybe like a month or so, your confidence level is going to be through the roof. You're going to have so many aha moments. You're going to say to me, oh my God, that's what that cue means? You're absolutely going to love teaching. The teachers who have gone through that program have transformed from even some of them having feelings of dread and fear and anxiety around teaching to loving how easy and fun teaching is. And it all hinges on really understanding movement. And understanding movement for us as yoga teachers is understanding anatomy. So if that sounds like something you want to do, you can look up that program on my Instagram and on my website. That's the one-to-one program. But if you contact me and use the word podcast offer, there's a special discount. So sure, go ahead and take a look at it, but know that if you are really motivated to enroll to fix this problem that you have, not understanding anatomy, I want to give you an incentive to say yes. And I'd love to connect it to the fact that you heard this offer here on the show. So just send me a DM with the word podcast offer, and I'll set up a time to chat with you on the phone, find out a little bit more about where you're at, share a little bit about how I can help, and then give you an incentive to say yes. Okay, that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll chat with you again next week on the next episode of Conversations for Yoga Teachers. Namaste.